So Command & Conquer Red Alert is meant to be like a prequel to the Command & Conquer series with the whole weird Tiberium future thing. Command & Conquer Red Alert is all about the Cold War in an alternate timeline. So what they do is they heighten everything and they forget about all that. So the timeline of the Command & Conquer Red Alert universe diverges with ours when Albert Einstein invents a time machine, goes back in time, and assassinates Adolf Hitler.
My watch is not working. Professor Einstein, this is an honor.
Then the game's campaign is about Soviet Russia invading and conquering Europe and how America fights back. And then the game has 2 expansions. You can find Wikipedia. Notable points of the series that are evident from the beginning is that it's kind of silly nature, how ground units of men can get run over by vehicle units, and the frivolous use of nuclear missiles, which is a very game-breaking kind of thing. First one to nukes doesn't win-win, but it's really hard to get past it. But you have to do a lot to get nuclear missiles.
Incredible! We made it disappear and reappear.
You have to spend a lot of resources in order to get nuclear missiles. The gameplay of Command & Conquer games and Command & Conquer Red Alert games differ from other RTSs is where there's maybe multiple resources that you need to gather between having stock, supply, and gathering minerals or gathering Vespian gas. There is really 2 resources in Command & Conquer games: money and time. And in some versions of the game, time is more of a resource quality. In the campaigns, there's the standard like, oh, here are a bunch of units, and you have this set amount of units to get past this obstacle course, so you can kind of control, see how the game feels when you go later on for missions. And then you enter into base building. And base building is having a command center that pretty much fabricates the rest of your base. You build an ore refinery that then mines ore that gets you money, and you use your money to pay for different buildings that are then built in your command center, are able to be deployed on the site. You have your barracks, you have your vehicle bay, you have your nuclear missile, you have your gun turrets, you have your Tesla coils, whatever silly things they come up with. And only being able to build one building at a time makes a lot of gameplay decision about when you make units, when you make buildings and in what order, placement of those buildings, and what is the other person doing. Like a lot of RTSs. But what I'm trying to highlight is the notable absence of workers. You don't have workers that can build one building and gather one of 3 types of resource. All of the labor in this game happens automatically. Or more accurately, happens behind the scenes. So much so that a gameplay mechanic is training an engineer, and with the engineer is a non-combat unit, but when he enters buildings, it takes them over, implying that the building is automated computer, and if you send a techie guy in there, now that is your building. And of course, you can retake a building over and over, flipping from one side to another. I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward in this analysis. Red Alert 2 takes place a couple years after Command & Conquer Red Alert, where there is a puppet premier that has been placed in charge of the Soviet Union, though oddly, the Soviet Union are still Soviets somehow? I mean, I guess alternate timeline America is less good at propping up puppets than current timeline America, though also, current America's track record isn't really that great right now. We're kind of fucking up a lot. Jeez, guys. Those people are dead. So in Red Alert 2, the game starts out with the Soviets using mind control to disarm the United States nuclear weapons. And then they invade America! And Red Alert 2 has one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, and when Hell March 2 fucking kicks in as a bunch of Soviet warbirds, balloons, storm the beaches of New York and fucking plow through the Statue of Liberty, it is amazing. Like, I've never been so shocked and also so turned on by the invasion of my own country. Like, this fucking slaps. It fucking slaps. God, I could gush about this soundtrack all day, and by gush I mean try to talk about it before just starting to impersonate it as it plays in my mind over and over. God, I love this soundtrack. By modern standards, the unit selection is a little bit lackluster. There isn't much of an HD version of this game to play. I had to it barely runs on Windows 10. Yuri's Revenge kept freezing up on me. Probably why I love playing as Iraq so much, because the biotrooper that attacks people with toxic waste just melts other soldiers with like one hit. And I love one-hit kill units. Just like in Red Alert 2 uses the same mechanics of money and time to build your base. They introduce several like fun units. Like the Soviets have attack squids, and the Americans get attack dolphins to specifically counter the attack squids in the water. There's lots of fun with invisible and camouflaged units. And I should mention that the whole series is notable for the live-action cutscenes where actors portray Russians and Stalin.
Jeez Louise! It's Stalin!
Red Alert 2 plays with this alternate timeline. When you play as the Americans or the Russians, you play through the same conflict, but just on a different size. So there's two alternate endings for whichever one you go through. When you play through as the Soviets, you generally start to discover how Yuri is taking over the Soviet Union for itself. And by the end, you have to fight off Yuri, the master psychic dude that made the invasion of America possible in the first place. When you play through as America, you are part of the fleeing part of the United States Army that is gathering back and then figuring out how to take out psychic soldiers and psychic control beings to take back America. You end up reaching out to European allies from Red Alert 1 who have problems of their own, but Albert Einstein comes through to replace the nuclear weapon as your weapon of mass destruction with a weather-generating machine, so you can make a catastrophic lightning storm over your enemy's base that does about equivalent damage to a nuke. So that's fun. Then in Yuri's Revenge, after the main story of Red Alert 2, it turns out Yuri had an ultimate plan of a giant machine that just takes over the entire world. So as the Americans, you build the time machine so you can go back to the point in the middle of the Red Alert campaign, and instead of fighting the Russians, you fight Yuri and his specific troops that are setting up the Doomsday device. Similarly, as Russia, you actually fight to invade the American time machine and you steal it so that you can do the same thing, but for Russia. The whole thing ends up with a cold treaty between America and Russia as they go to fight the last of Yuri's forces. So multiplayer-wise, this means there are 3 factions now in the game. America, Russia, then there are other communist and capitalist Europe allies with their variant and special units, but then also Yuri. Then Command & Conquer 3 happens, but it's made by a little bit different studio. Every one of these is like made by a slightly different studio and team. This one is, by the time Westwood, is owned by EA. For the first time, there's a fully 3D engine where you have your units go around. And the gameplay is a lot more mobile and vertical, with units that shoot troopers up and down like hills and ledges. And the other big thing they introduced for the campaign is it's only co-op. So when you play through it single player, you're playing with an ally partner, which is a bit frustrating, especially since they seem to cut your resources and troop limits in half in order to give the other half to the thing. So instead of controlling 2 armies, or 2 people with their own army, it's more like you're controlling half an army, and I didn't love it. In fact, I still haven't completed this game. But the story of Command & Conquer 3 has the Soviets about to lose another war. Which war, I'm not sure. They're about to lose a war to America. So the premier, having abandoned everything, 2 generals go back in time, assassinate Albert Einstein, which, to be honest, kinda has it coming, and then go back to the future. Well, back to their present time, where now they're in charge of Russia. Nuclear weapons do not exist, because Albert Einstein is dead. But a third faction has risen up in the world, that being the Empire of the Rising Sun. Imperialist Japan invades Russia while they're at war with America, which is also probably the silliest of the series and most awesome, with like chainsaw wielding bears and tanks that maybe the tanks shot bears? I don't know. And then Japan has a bunch of ships and boats that transform into giant robots that attack other units, and also have psychotic schoolgirl soldiers that you have to fight. It is really loony. I like everything that I see there. It's a lot of fun, but couldn't play through a lot of it without a partner. The music also takes a step down. Like, Hell March 3 is fine, but Hell March 2 is based. Like, ugh. And like, I'd say Russia being invaded is not as iconic as America being invaded, but it's still pretty funny to see bleak Soviet Russia with like all your animal skin hats, sitting around with AK-47s, being invaded by literal anime. So, probably two criticisms of the Command & Conquer series would be it practices the great man theory of history, where like, oh, nuclear weapons exist solely because of Albert Einstein. And Einstein can do all these weird things. Or the Nazis were only bad because of Hitler. I like how in 3, after the Soviets change history, there's like a comeuppance where, oh, the world is so different that they're kind of confused about what's going on, and the nuclear weapons are gone, and there's a bit of comeuppance. Because it was, up to that point, super convenient that the two people that went back in time to change history happen to now run the country. When they, like, jump back, and then Hot Tub Time Machine jump, yeah, whatever, forward, yeah. So these problems end up being remedied in the story of Red Alert 4. And Red Alert 4 does a lot of things right. For one, nuclear weapons are back regardless of the death of Albert Einstein. Fascism is in the picture again, as even without Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, there isn't a place for a demonstrable end goal of fascist ideas. So fascism remains, obscuring itself under like, oh, we just are nationalists, we're just thinking about our country. But boy, aren't those Armenians annoying? And they're all like that. So it's very much so the racism continuing, because the Nazis and Hitler and that ideology is never fully dealt with. But on the same hand, capitalist America has a bunch of unfettered workers. All of the money that goes from the government for their constant wars and military upgrades goes to contractors, goes to big business, and there's a lot of poor people whose lives seem to be swayed by the whims of the powerful and who decides to put up a burger joint. And meanwhile, the Soviet Union is gone. They very much so resemble capitalist Russia as exists today. And capitalist Russia even has its own Vladimir Putin, though it's not Vladimir Putin because alternate timeline, but he's very Vladimir Putin-like, using the iconography of the defunct Soviet Union, including chainsaw bears and murder moppets, and the fact that they fended off fascist Japan as propaganda for his country. And you see some old Soviet soldiers and old generals like shake their head at the use of the things that they built together. Just like in Chernobyl, how the disaster was averted by people coming together and at the ground level working on problems, digging dirt, trying to scrub away the nuclear fallout, containing animals that were irradiated from the disaster. The Russian peasantry that are very symbolically and filmed-wise the same way that the American peasantry is, yearn for this time where they built and they strove for things together. And then Hell March 4 kicks in. Something of a combination of the 3 other Hell Marches, the fast pace of the first Hell March, the rock bass guitar from Hell March 2, and the orchestra from Hell March 3 join in. So these 3 old Soviet generals that are now less than peasantry, geriatric, and old go back in time, and they use time travel to combine the power of not only of the old USSR, but then the more modern versions of the USSR in the past. And instead of going back in time and killing someone to change the present, they decide they need to change the future. The past, Soviet Russia, USSR, invades modern-day America. So in the past Red Alert games, there was a unit called the Spy, and the Spy was another non-combat unit. But what the Spy would do is disguise as a soldier from the other team, and then it would sneak into your refinery or your command center or your optics to shut down a radar or steal money from the other player. This is important because the campaigns of Red Alert 4 play a little bit differently than those of 3 and 2, where if you play as the Soviets, you invade America from the past. And the storyline goes that instead of a bunch of armies coming from the past, just the command center comes in, and the command center has enough money and gold and minerals to build a refinery. And canonically, where the troops come from is the peasantry of America in the modern day, the dissatisfied workers. So in a way, it is not the Soviets invading America, but the Soviets giving Americans the power to rise up in their country. Some units do come up from the past, and some armies from the past, but they're used for the past conflicts, because it still all has to happen in order to invade the future. Meanwhile, nuclear weapons are gone in this game again. The nuclear weapons that canonically were taken away in Red Alert 3 exist again in Red Alert 4 because there are more scientists and more people that can figure out how to split the atom. But they're useless because there's no Russia for America to nuke. You can't nuke the past, which is pretty funny seeing live actors commanding them to nuke Russia, where Russia is on the phone is like, I'm not attacking you. We're a capitalist country like you are now. We're not invading you with 30-year-old Soviet technology. So when you play through the Soviet campaign, you conquer America. And the campaign ends with Stalin saying goodbye to Lenin and Kropotkin and Trotsky as they step through the time machine into modern-day America to help organize the people of America, while Stalin stays in the past to lose his war in Europe in a doomed USSR. So when you play as the American campaign, it pulls a bit of a switcheroo. You play as a unit that is a spy in early Soviet Russia. He's smoking cigars, he's talking to people and clients, he's doing small campaigns with CIA agents to destroy things and sabotage the USSR. And he finds the time machine operation going on with all the different technologies and the weird and the chainsaw bears and the attack squids, and he's like, what is all of this? I have so many things to report. And he sees an attack going off. He sees a squid and a command center go through the portal to New Orleans, and he gets on the radio right away and reports an attack on New Orleans. But what he gets back from early America is there's no attack in New Orleans. There's no one teleporting here. There's no portal. There's no giant squids. You're crazy. So the spy goes through to the future and ends up following Lenin and Trotsky into modern-day America, and finding himself among the People's Army of the United States of America. And the spy, finding that America won all of his wars, but now he's stuck in the future, has joined the Red Army of America. And so, as a spy with talents and knowledge of the area, is deployed into capitalist Russia. And the American campaign in Red Alert 4 is Soviet America invading capitalist Russia. And of course they do some neat things with like old Soviet soldiers that rise up, and similarly to people of America being trained as conscripts in a Soviet army, they do the same thing in Russia again, and you get more of Japan fighting in for the third one that of course kind of knocks it back to a status quo for presumably more Red Alert games. But overall, there's some really crazy turns. Men in High Castle has a fascist America and even like a Japanese invaded Imperial America, but I haven't seen a lot of socialist America alternate history stuff. So it was pretty neat and fun, and like a really ballsy way to take the franchise forward. So notable gameplay differences for this game is it kind of opens up the tech tree, where you can go through one route, but you can't have all of them. So just about anyone, except for imperialist Japan, post-imperialist Japan? I don't know. Complicated, can check into chainsaw bears because the Soviet technology is the influence on both sides now. But that does cut off other tech tree. Also, playing as the Soviets in multiplayer now, they no longer connect money for resources. everything they build is now solely dependent on time. So you can build one building really quick. You can build multiple buildings now. If you tech it right, one building will boost another one's manufacture, but there is no money to collect. It is all purely time and strategy based. So the multiplayer is pretty fun. And also, using left click for anything is now out the window, so I was happy for that. God, I hated left click only in all of the Command & Conquer games. You would select a unit with the left click, and then you tell it where to go with the left click. A Red Alert and Red Alert 2, you couldn't double click a unit to select all of that unit type, so it was really hard to get a bunch of units to like attack an airship if they weren't all together. So hey, thanks for watching. I'm Ray Richards, the Sugar Ray, Thought Ray. Did you play the Red Alert games? How fun were they? Why is it impossible to play Red Alert 2 on anything that's modern? Would you like to see me play Red Alert 3 with someone? That would be neat. As always, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic because capitalist America doesn't make living through a pandemic easy. So I have a Patreon. I would love if you follow it. I would love it even more if you donate and support it, but I'm happy just to talk to you and have you subscribe to this channel and like this video and talk about how much you also like strategy games and why aren't we getting any new ones. I don't want to play this on my phone. I have a computer for a reason, guys. On my Patreon, you can also read my fiction that I write, similar to Command & Conquer 4. I don't have time to actually write an alternate history with all the other projects that I have going on, but you can read the stuff that I'm currently working on, including rough drafts and first drafts and previous stories that are going up for publication. It's the only place you can read them because I'm trying to get people to pay me to read them. But that's the only place you can read Our Dying Days, or what is that? Veronica Venom and Otherworldly Tales. Thanks for watching. Workers of the World Unite. Don't forget to be awesome. So Red Alert is a pretty slapping series.